Dear students, today we shall talk about certain important concepts in biological classification here now. These concepts are important for both APMT and AMCET syllabus. Every year you get at least 1 or 2 questions from this lesson alone. And these are equally important even for the other syllabi like AFMC, JIPMER, AIMS, CMC, so on and so forth. So first we will talk about certain important concepts here now. Then later on we shall take up certain questions and discuss the questions at length. Now the biological classification here now, the history of biological classification, if you look into Hippocrates. Hippocrates is a scientist here now. Hippocrates divided all organisms into insects, fish, birds and mammalia. So he divided the organisms into 4 groups. All the organisms that belong to animal kingdom into 4 groups: insects, fish, birds and mammalia. Then later on Pliny, scientist Pliny, divided the organisms into 3 groups here now, namely Aquatilia, all aquatic animals he placed under a group called Aquatilia, all terrestrial animals in a group called Terrestria, and all animals which are aerial in habitat, all animals which are aerial in habitat under a group called Volatilia, So Pliny divided the organisms into Aquatilia, Terrestria and Volatilia. Hippocrates divided the organisms into insects, fish, birds and mammalia. Then later on Aristotle. Aristotle, who is considered as father of biology, Aristotle divided the organisms into Amia. Amia are the organisms with blood, and Anemia, the organisms without blood. The organisms without blood. So we divided the organisms into 2 groups, Amia with blood and Anemia without blood. Then later on the John Ray, the English naturalist here now. John Ray, English naturalist John Ray, who is considered as father of British natural history. Father of British natural history here now. This John Ray, he was the person who coined the term species. He coined the term species. He coined the term species and he differentiated between genus and species. He differentiated between genus and species. And he was the first person to coin the term species, and he also differentiated between genus and species. He described about 8,000 plants, 18,000 plants. He described the characteristics of about 18,000 plants and made a mention of the characteristics of all these plants in a book called Historia Generalis Plantarum. Historia Generalis Plantarum. Made a mention about all those 18,000 plants in a book called Historia Generalis Plantarum. Then later on Linnaeus, Carolus Linnaeus. This Carolus Linnaeus he has mentioned about the characteristics of about 4,000 plants and made a mention of all these plants in a book called Systema Naturae. Systema Naturae. So suppose you get a question in the MCET or AAPMT, who is the author of Systema Naturae? You should answer Carolus Linnaeus. In the same way, if you get a question, who is the author of Historia Generalis Plantarum? You should answer John Ray. Now this Linnaeus happens to be father of taxonomy and modern systematics. Father of taxonomy and modern systematics. He happens to be father of taxonomy and modern systematics. And he is a person who popularized binomial nomenclature. Popularized binomial nomenclature. Apart from Systema Naturae, he has written another book called Species Plantarum. He has written another book called Species Plantarum. Apart from Systema Naturae, he is also the author of another book called Systema Naturae. Now, the concept of homology was put forth by Richard Owen. Concept of homology was put forth by Richard Owen. Then homeostasis, the concept of homeostasis was put forth by Claude Bernard. And an account of comparative anatomy was given by George Cuvier. Concept of an account of comparative anatomy was given by George Cuvier. That's why he is also considered as father of comparative anatomy, and paleontology. He is considered as father of comparative anatomy and paleontology. Then Buffon, he gave the idea of evolution. And he is the father of, and he is author of natural history. He is the author of natural history. Okay, he is author of natural history. Now, in the biological classification, dear students, you come across nearly 4 types of the methods of classification here now. The first method of classification here now, which was in vogue somewhere during 17th and 18th century, it was artificial classification here now. Artificial classification. This artificial classification, it is based on exclusively the morphological characteristics, habit and habitat of the organisms. So the artificial classification is based on morphological characteristics, habit and habitat. And it was strongly believed by, or rather it was put forth by, this classification was advocated by Aristotle. Aristotle is considered as father of biology, and he has written a book called Historia Plantarum. He has written a book called Historia Plantarum. So Aristotle was the person who put forth the artificial classification. This artificial classification in plant kingdom was supported by Theophrastus. In plant kingdom, it was supported by Theophrastus. Theophrastus put forth artificial classification in case of plants. Theophrastus is also considered as father of botany. Yes. So artificial classification is exclusively based on morphological characteristics, like habit, habitat, feeding habits, okay, so on and so forth. Here now, it was advocated by Aristotle. He made a mention about this in a book called Historia Animalium and Historia Plantarum. Historia Animalium, another book called Historia Animalium, was also written by Aristotle. In both the books, he made a mention of that. And in plants, it was put forth by Theophrastus, who is considered as father of botany. You know. The next is you have natural classification. This natural classification was put forth by Linnaeus. And in plant kingdom, it was put forth by Bentham and Hooker. In plant kingdom by Bentham and Hooker. In animal kingdom by Linnaeus. You know. And this artificial classification, natural classification, is based on not only the morphological characteristics, cytological characteristics are taken into consideration, structural characteristics are taken into consideration. Apart from this, the reproductive characteristics of the organisms are also taken into consideration. So, Linnaeus divided the organisms on the basis of morphology, cytology, anatomical characteristics, and the reproductive characteristics. On the basis of all these perspectives, Linnaeus divided the then living organisms into different groups. You know. Linnaeus divided the organisms into fish, insects, worms, birds, fish, birds, amphibia, and quadrupeds. He divided them into nearly 6 groups here now. All invertebrates, he placed them under insects and worms. All vertebrates, he placed them under fish, amphibia, birds, and quadrupeds. The modern form of natural classification, improvised form of natural classification in animal kingdom, was put forth by Haeckel and Mayer. So basically it was put forth by Linnaeus. Later on it was modified by Haeckel and Mayer. Linnaeus, on the basis of the natural classification, divided the organisms into 6 groups. Now he placed all the invertebrates under 2 groups, namely insects and worms, and vertebrates under 4 groups, fish, birds, amphibia, and quadrupeds. The third method of classification is called phylogenetic method of classification. This phylogenetic method of classification is also called cladistic classification. This phylogenetic classification or cladistic classification is based on the phylogeny, that is ancestral characters, phylogenetic characters, and taxonomic characters of the organisms. Taxonomic characteristics of organisms. Based on phylogenetic characteristics and taxonomic characteristics of organisms. Now, this phylogenetic classification was practiced by several scientists like Eschler in plants, Hutchinson in plants, Engler and Prantl Engler and Prantl, Massey, okay, all these they practice this phylogenetic method of classification in plant kingdom. Aichler, Hutchinson, Engler and Prantl, Massey and all. Then in animal kingdom, that is among animals, this was practiced by Dobzhansky and Mayer. Dobzhansky and Mayer. So it was made applicable to animals by Dobzhansky and Mayer, and in plant kingdom it was practiced by Engler and Prantl, Hutchinson, Aichler, Massey, so on and so forth. Now in animal kingdom they classified the organisms on the basis of two characteristics. Under phylogenetic classification, the scientists classified the organisms under the basis of two characteristics, namely analogous characters. So on what basis the animals were divided under phylogenetic classification? First one is analogous characters, second one is homologous characters. What are analogous characters or analogy? Characters shared by a pair of organisms. Characters by a pair of organisms due to convergent evolution. Characters shared by a pair of organisms, same characters shared by a pair of organisms due to convergent evolution can be called analogy. I'll give an example so that you can easily understand. Like patagium of flying squirrel and wings of sparrow. Wings of sparrow are the best example for analogous characters. Patagium of flying squirrel and wing of sparrow, where both of them help in flight. In flying squirrel, that is Pteropus, which belongs to Mammalia, and sparrow, that belongs to aves. In both of them, the wings help in flight. But however, they belong to two different groups, two different class. Like squirrel belongs to Mammalia, sparrow belongs to aves. Then what makes them exhibit similar characteristics with regard to the morphology when they belong to different ancestry? It is because of common habitat. Though they belong to different ancestry, since they live in the same habitat, they exhibit more or less similar features, rendering same functions. So here ancestry is different. There is a structural dissimilarity between the two organs, but however functions are same. So such characters can be called analogous characters, and when structure is different and the ancestry is different, what is the necessity for them to exhibit similar characters with regard to functioning? That is because of the same habitat, and that is also referred to as convergent evolution. How is it defined? When animals that belong to different ancestry live in the same habitat, exhibit more or less similar characteristic features, it can be called convergent evolution. Best example for the convergent evolution, I would say, suppose you take an aquatic habitat here now. A fish lives in water, a whale lives in water, and a reptile called ichthyosaur also lives in water. And all of them, they belong to different groups. Like fish may belong to either chondrichthyes or osteichthyes. Ichthyosaur belongs to reptilia. Whale belongs to Mammalia. So they belong to different ancestry. Since they live in the same habitat here now, they exhibit more or less similar morphological characteristics. Like all of them have spindle-shaped streamlined body and flipper-like limbs. Like that, the animals that belong to different ancestry live in the same habitat, exhibit more or less similar morphological characteristics. It can be called convergent evolution here. So the example what I have given here exemplify convergent evolution, and they are also placed under analogous characteristics. So under phylogenetic classification, the organisms are classified on the basis of analogous characters. Then another one is homologous characters. Homologous characters. What are homologous characters? The characters shared by a pair of organisms. Characters shared by a pair of organisms due to common ancestry. Due to common ancestry. Characters shared by a pair of organisms due to common ancestry is called homologous characters. Okay, characters shared by same characters again here. Similar characters shared by a pair of organisms due to common ancestry are called homologous characters. I shall give an example to make you understand this concept clearly. Wing of finches and wing of sparrow. Wing of sparrow. Okay, here wing, both of them are birds. Finches are also birds. Finches are the birds which lived in Galapagos Islands and they were noticed by Charles Darwin. So wing of sparrow and wing of finches, both of them belong to the same ancestry, and in them wings help in flight. Okay, another classical example for homology, like forelimb of various vertebrates. Forelimb of man, forelimb of horse, forelimb of whale, cat's paw, all are also considered as homologous characters. Forelimb of man, forelimb of horse, cat's paw, forelimb of whale, that is flipper of whale. All of them are homologous because they are all structurally similar with the similar bones, like upper arm containing humerus, forearm containing radius and ulna, then hand consisting of carpels in the wrist, metacarpals in the palm, phalanges in the digits. So the structurally they are similar. Origin is also same because all the examples what I have put before you, like whale, then human being, then horse, then cat, all of them belong to mammalia. So structure is same, then the origin is also same, but functions may be different here. Okay, functions sometimes may be same, as I have given example here now, wing of finches and wing of sparrow, or sometimes function may be different here. So such organs can be called homologous characteristics. When they belong to same ancestry with similar structure, then what is the necessity for them to render different functions? It is because of different habit and habitat. As they live in different habit and habitat the organs, though they are structurally similar with the same origin, they render different functions. So under phylogenetic classification, these two are taken into account to classify the organisms. Talk about the fourth method of classification, that is new systematics. This new systematics was put forth by Julian Huxley. Okay, Julian Huxley is a scientist who put forth this concept called new systematics. In this, the animals resemble each other with regard to several characteristics. They are mutable and they undergo slow changes. So these are the points that are considered in new systematics. The animals resemble each other, they belong to one another, at the same time they are mutable, that is they are likely to undergo mutations or changes, and the changes occur slowly. And there are different forms of new systematics. Like you have number one, morphotaxonomy, where the organisms are classified on the basis of morphological characteristics. The next you have cytotaxonomy. The organisms are classified on the basis of cell structure, on the basis of various organelles present in the cell, and on the basis of even nucleus. Here even the number of chromosomes, the structure of chromosomes, banding pattern of the chromosomes also taken into account to classify the organisms under cytotaxonomy here. Since nucleus plays a vital role in classifying the organisms under cytotaxonomy, cytotaxonomy is also called karyotaxonomy here. Is also called karyotaxonomy. Then next you have another one called chemotaxonomy here. Chemotaxonomy. In this chemotaxonomy here now, the serum is taken into account. The serum, the characteristics of the serum, the proteins present in the serum. On the basis of that, the organisms are classified into different groups. So on the basis of the proteins and the serum analysis, the organisms are divided into different types in chemotaxonomy here. Okay, is also called biochemical taxonomy here. Okay, the next is experimental taxonomy here. Experimental taxonomy, on the basis of certain experiments conducted here now on the various characteristics of the organisms can be classified into different groups here now. Then apart from this, you have another one called numerical taxonomy here now. Numerical taxonomy. Numerical taxonomy is also called phonetic classification. Phonetic classification. It is also called phenotypic classification. Numerical taxonomy is also called phonetic classification or phenotypic classification. Here, operational taxonomic units are taken into account to classify the organisms. What do you call them? Operational taxonomic units. You call them OTU. On the basis of OTU, the organisms are classified into different groups. Operational taxonomic units. What are operational taxonomic units here now? The morphological characteristics are given some weightage here now. Some quantitative analysis done to the morphological characteristics. On the basis of the quantitative analysis here now, corresponding to the morphological characteristics, the organisms are divided into different groups here now. Each morphological characteristic feature is given some weightage here now. Then overall measure of morphological characteristics is taken into account here now, and their quantitative analysis is done, and on the basis of that, the organisms are classified into different groups here now. So their quantitative analysis of organisms based on the morphological characteristics is called numerical taxonomy or phonetic taxonomy or phenotypic taxonomy. So all these methods come under new systematics that was put forth by Julian Huxley. Systematics is a branch of science that deals with diversity among the organisms, taxonomy of the organisms, and classification of the organisms. It is a branch of science, a comprehensive term that includes key classification, then taxonomy, and diversity of the organisms. Apart from this, it also establishes evolutionary relationship among the organisms. So the characteristics that are taken into account in the systematics are: number one, ancestral relationship between organisms. Number two, taxonomical characteristics, that is classification. Number three, key taxonomy. Key taxonomy. Key is a device which is used to identify the organism on the basis of certain diagnostic or distinguishing features here. So key is a method employed in the classification here now. What is a key? What is it referred to as? On the basis of certain diagnostic characteristics, on the basis of certain unique characteristics of the organism here now, a key is prepared. On the basis of the key also, the organisms are classified here now. Then taxonomy is a branch of systematics that deals with identification, nomenclature, and systematic arrangement of organisms. It deals with identification, nomenclature, and systematic arrangement of organisms. The term taxonomy was coined by A.P. de Candolle. It was coined by A.P. de Candolle. Okay, you already learned. I made a mention. Father of taxonomy is Carolus Linnaeus. He is also considered as father of modern systematics. Now, Carolus von Linnaeus is a scientist who popularized the concept of binomial nomenclature. Now, dear students, we shall discuss certain important points and under this binomial nomenclature, which can be asked in APEAPCET and even other exams, okay, related to the medical sciences. In the biological classification here now we shall talk about certain important concepts in binomial nomenclature, which can be asked in the APEAPCET, APEAPCET, and all other competitive exams. Now, this binomial nomenclature, the concept of binomial nomenclature was put forth by Caspar Bohen and Dudenus. It was put forth first by Caspar Bohen and Dudenus. Later on, it was popularized by Linnaeus. It was popularized by Linnaeus. Suppose in the APEAPCET or APMT or any other exam, suppose you had a question here now, who put forth the concept of binomial nomenclature? Suppose in the options Caspar Bohen is given, you have to go for Caspar Bohen. If both Caspar Bohen and Linnaeus are given, you have to go for Caspar Bohen. In case in the options now Caspar Bohen is not given, then you should go for Linnaeus, because the concept first it was put forth by Caspar Bohen and Dudenus, and later on it was popularized by Linnaeus. Now, what is binomial nomenclature? If a scientific name consists of two parts now, it is called binomial nomenclature, where the first part of the scientific name is called genus, the second part is called species. The first part is generic name, the second part is called specific name. And there are certain rules now that are to be followed while naming the organisms. All these rules are framed in a branch of biology, our branch that deals with the nomenclature, which is called International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, ICZN. Same way you have even IBZN also, International Botanical Nomenclature here. International Code of Botanical Nomenclature. International Code of Botanical Nomenclature. In ICZN here now, certain rules are laid down which are to be adhered to while giving scientific names to the organisms. All these rules in fact are excerpted from a book called Procedure Taxonomy. They are derived from a book called Procedure Taxonomy. Procedure Taxonomy, and this book was written by Schenk and MC Master. That book was written by Schenk and MC Master. So from this book, all those rules are obtained and they are framed in the form of ICZN, International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. So when any animal is discovered newly, that animal should be given a scientific name instead of a common name. The common names pose communication gap, and there are several disadvantages with the common names. To overcome those disadvantages, every organism must be given a scientific name consisting of either two parts or three parts. If it consists of two parts, it is called binomial nomenclature. If it consists of three parts, it is called trinomial nomenclature. In binomial nomenclature, as I made a mention earlier, the first part is called genus or generic name, which is invariably a noun, and the second part is called species or specific name, which is invariably an adjective. Scientific names should be derived from Latin or they should be Latinized here now. Because when other languages, when they are taken here now, as the language undergoes changes, the names also get changed. As a result, the people after a few hundreds of years may not follow that. Your successes may not follow that. That's why scientific name should be derived from Latin, or they should be Latinized, because Latin and Greek are dead languages. They do not undergo any changes. That when scientific name is printed, it should be printed in italics. To differentiate between a common term and a scientific name, always scientific name should be printed in italics. When it is handwritten, both genus and species should be underlined separately. When the scientific name is either printed or handwritten, the first, that is genus, the first letter of genus should be capital letter followed by small letters. The species is also written with a small letter, starting with a small letter. When the scientific name is printed, the name of the author should be written at the end of scientific name. For instance, you take an example. Felis Leo is scientific name of lion. So it is followed by L. Linnaeus, 1758. That is, the term Felis Leo was coined by Linnaeus, and he proposed this name in the year 1758. So in case it is printed, the name of the author and the year of publication should be mentioned at the end of scientific name. Now here you can notice the genus begins with a capital letter and the species with a small letter. In case the genus is not the one under which the species is placed, or the species name is changed, the original author's name should be mentioned in parenthesis. Like this Felis Leo, it has been changed as Panthera Leo. The new name for Felis Leo is Panthera Leo. So when it is written like this, the original author's name should be mentioned in parenthesis. That is Panthera Leo, Linnaeus, 1758 should be mentioned in brackets. Okay, to indicate the original author of that particular name here. Now, the name of the author or taxonomist should be mentioned in parenthesis, okay, along with the year of publication here. Also one of the rules here. Then, when scientific names here, when many scientific names are given to a particular organism here, okay, a particular organism living in different places here, that organism is given many scientific names by different taxonomies here. Now, among these scientific names, the first proposed valid name is considered as senior synonym or valid name, and all the other names are considered as synonyms. I repeat once again, if a particular name, animal living in different places is given several scientific names by different authors. Among these names, the first proposed valid name is considered as scientific name or senior synonym, and all the other names which are proposed subsequently are considered as junior synonyms. And this concept of giving preference to the first valid name is also called law of priority here. Then there is another concept here now. Suppose the same scientific name is given to different organisms belonging to different species or different genera or classes here, then these names are considered as homonyms. Among these homonyms, the first proposed name is considered as senior homonym, and subsequent names are considered as junior homonyms. Then suppose the same term is used for both genus and species, they are known as tautonyms. They are known as tautonyms. The same scientific name, okay, the same word is given for both genus and species, then it is referred to as tautonym. For example, Naza is the scientific name of cobra, whereas it becomes tautonym. Gajalla is the scientific name of a deer that lives in grasslands. A deer that lives in grasslands. So such names are called tautonyms. The hierarchical method of classification was put forth by Linnaeus. Hierarchical method of classification was put forth by Linnaeus. That is, placing the taxons one above the other, basing upon their complexity is called hierarchical method of classification. This hierarchical method of classification was put forth by Linnaeus. Then branching representation of various taxons. Branching representation of various taxons. Branching representation of various taxons was put forth by Haeckel. So branching was put forth by Haeckel and hierarchical method was put forth by Linnaeus. Linnaeus, among various taxons, introduced only species, genus, order, class, and family. Okay. Linnaeus introduced how many now? Species, genus, family, order, and class. These taxons were introduced by Linnaeus. The taxon phylum was introduced by Haeckel. Okay. So species, genus, family, order, and class were introduced by Linnaeus. Now the term phylum was introduced by Haeckel.